Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the PostUp with David Grubb. I, of course, am David Grubb here on Boot Crew Media, and today we're going to put the draft talk on hold just a little bit, and we'll look at some trade rumors and start looking ahead to free agency. One name on the roster has been at the center of trade discussions for a while, probably since December of last year when it seemed like, the Pelicans season was unofficially over, and that, of course, is Herb Jones. So far in this offseason, his name has been tied to the Dallas Mavericks, the Los Angeles Lakers, and the Philadelphia 76ers. Of course, last season was a major setback for her, primarily due to injury, had the season ending shoulder surgery. But Herb Jones is by far one of the most respected players on the New Orleans Pelicans, both on and off the court. Yes, he played in only 20 games last season, and his shooting numbers were the lowest of his career. But his impact on the court remains as high as ever. Last season, the Pelicans played like a team 25 wins better than they were when Herb Jones was on the court. That was a career best, better than the plus 23 from his rookie year and a significant boost over the average of plus 16 over his first 3 seasons. For comparison, the New Orleans Pelicans were a plus 24 with Zion Williamson last season. Nikola Jokic was at a plus 21.3. So the Pels were also 3.9 points better per 100 possessions when he was on the floor offensively. So even with his shooting down, his value as a connector and his high basketball IQ continued to play dividends for the Pels. On the defensive end, where Herb has made his name, Herb was in the 94th percentile as far as his impact in limiting scoring. Pelicans opponents scored almost 8 points fewer per 100 possessions with Jones on the floor compared to when they played without him. He was in the 90th percentile when it came to defensive effective field goal percentage and enforcing turnovers. Both of those were way up from his previous career totals. Now, yes, it was a very short, small sample because of the injury, but still, I think overall the likelihood remains very low that Herb Jones gets moved this offseason. We haven't gotten many updates on his progress or a timetable of his recovery, so I think his current value in any deal externally has been diminished. But given that Herb Jones still has 2 years remaining on his contract, and it's a very team-friendly deal, it totals about $28.8 million over these next 2 seasons, his play has also consistently outpaced his contract value. Remember, he was a second-round pick. Pelicans were able to sign him to a deal early during his rookie year, get him under contract, and then his extension has been very favorable for the team. Yes, there are aspects he can improve, but I think the utilization is the biggest issue when it comes to Herb Jones. And I think if there's one player on the team who embodies the principles that Joe Dumars says that he wants to instill on the team, it's Herb Jones. Just because he can guard 1 through 5 doesn't mean he should. And I think that that's the biggest adjustment that the New Orleans Pelicans need to make in their usage of Herb Jones going forward. Not at 210 pounds. Herb just isn't built to take that kind of punishment. He isn't built, let's say, like a Drew Holiday or an Alex Caruso, who you saw guarding Nikola Jokic in the Western Conference semifinals. That's not Herb's, forte because of the way he's built. I think the Pelicans' defensive philosophy overall of switching everything all the time, that does not give you the best version of Herb Jones. I think limiting his defensive duties to guarding perimeter players would decrease that chance of injury going forward and make him a much more impactful player, even more so than he already is. I think if he's able to roam, you want Herb Jones to play a role like a free safety in football. And I think the Pelicans can maximize his talent, but he's going to need some help. The Pelicans need a center, of course, who's going to hold the back line of the defense. And they also need better on-ball defense at the point guard spot. DeJounte Murray failed miserably at that last season. Elfrid Payton is not a good on-ball defender. And Jose Alvarado is just too limited due to his size. So if the Pelicans do decide to move on from Herb Jones, ultimately, I don't think it'll be this season. Again, if things go left this season, if by the midway point of the season, it looks like the Pelicans are once again falling apart, even then, I don't think that this season, because because of this contract, I don't see the Pelicans moving on from Herb Jones. If they do, it would probably be the offseason, obviously, prior to the final year of his contract, unless, of course, the Pelicans agree to an extension with him before that. And I think that the number that Pelicans fans would probably be more concerned with at this time is what does a Herb Jones extension look like than what does a Herb Jones trade package look like. And I think they're going to have to be very careful in assessing his value, especially if the offensive numbers don't improve as far as shooting goes. I think ultimately you want to see Herb Jones get back to being a 50, 40, 90 player as he was in season 3, where he was just on the verge of topping all those things. But he's still been an 80% free throw shooter throughout his career. The three-point shooting obviously was very down last year, just over 30%, where he had been approaching 40% in his third season. So if he can get back to that upper 30s, low 40s as far as knocking down threes, particularly again from the corner, because that's where he's going to be suited and set up more often than not, I think, offensively, because you're going to see Trey Murphy above the break, you're going to see Zion above the break, and whomever is playing point guard playing above the break. That puts your 5 either in the dunker spot or moving out to the corner, and Herb Jones obviously starting in the corner, depending on how the offense moves. But I think if you make those adjustments, Herb Jones continues to bolster his value because he's already proven, look, over his first 4 seasons, when you look at his on-off ratings, and I'll say this just before we move on, when you look at his on-off ratings, he's either been first or second every year with the Pelicans. So when you have that kind of value, and then you look at his financial value in a league that is, you have to be very careful in how you spend your dollars. It is becoming more and more important. How do you spend your money? And when you have a player with this kind of value at this cost, then I think that you have to think about holding on to them a little longer. I understand the concerns about Herb's age at 26, but again, I've compared him at times to Derek White. Certainly Derek White has more ball handling responsibilities and has improved as a shooter. But if you look at those first 3 seasons in particular, they were very much on target with Herb Jones actually beating Derek Jones in some of those offensive categories. So if Herb can recover from this shoulder injury and then get to a place where he's back to making shots at a high level from the outside and puts himself in, he was scoring about 11 to 12 points a game last year, even with his hampered self. The year before, closer to 14. If you're getting 14 to 15 to 16 points on average, that area from Herb Jones, and you're getting 25 from Zion, if you're getting 25 from Trey Murphy, if you're getting 18 to 20 from whomever is playing that point guard spot, and you're getting consistent production from that center, count on 15 points again there, putting in a good bench, I think you have a very quality offense. Yes, again, there are ways for Herb Jones to improve, but certainly I think his value today to the Pelicans is at a place where you don't want to explore a trade just yet. Things can change in the future, but today I would say a trade is very unlikely. All right. So as we look ahead, the Pelicans also have some other rumors that have been floating out and about. You have to worry about the status of, let's say, a James Borrego, as the Pelicans have looked at his potential to move on. And it looks like from reports, it's indicating that, excuse me, I just hate dealing with this stuff. Technology is always a problem for older people. But as you look at James Borrego, he's one of 9 finalists for the Phoenix Suns head coaching spot. Phoenix interviewed 15 candidates before paring this list down to 9. Borrego is only one of 2 candidates, along with David Fizdale, who has previous head coaching experience. Of course, Borrego coached the Hornets from 2018 to 2022, leaving after 4 seasons with a 138 and 163 record. Over his last 3 seasons in Charlotte, and I think people just look at the losing part of that, but he took them from 23 wins to 33 wins to 43 wins over those last 3 seasons with the Hornets. He's been with the Pelicans for the last 2 seasons, and obviously he was brought in to help modernize the Pelicans' offensive attack. There have been reports that he and Willie Green have not always seen eye to eye when it comes to that. So even if Borrego doesn't get the Suns job, it's getting harder to imagine him returning to the bench for the Pelicans. If he does leave, quite frankly, I'm not sure where the Pelicans will look for another high-level assistant who has experience outside of hiring another former head coach. But then the question becomes, how much does that cost for a team that has notoriously underpaid its coaches? So keep paying attention to see what happens there. It could be a shakeup on the Pelicans bench. Speaking of getting paid, free agency will be here before you know it. And there will be options available for the New Orleans Pelicans, though the Pels will have to be very careful with how they spend their money. New Orleans is just over $18 million away from reaching the first apron. And then they have 13 players currently on the roster with team options for Brandon Boston and Elfrid Payton that total just over $5.5 million. So I wanted to start the backcourt on some reasonable, cost-effective, but talented options, because I can only operate right now when we talk about free agency on what the Pelicans have available. And they've got some exceptions available to them, but again, about $18 million away from that first apron. And I think that there are 5 options in the backcourt to address the position, your point guard position, reasonably cost effective while you wait for a DeJounte Murray recovery or a bigger trade to get a point guard, or if you're able to move up in this year's draft and still get the rights to draft a Dylan Harper. If you can't do those things, who are the most cost effective but also on court effective options available to the Pelicans? And I think you start with a guy like DeLon Wright, a veteran who has played for multiple organizations, currently sitting on the Knicks bench, but as a guy with length, a guy who has been able to shoot the ball fairly well throughout his career, and can come in and give you a taller, physical point guard at the point of attack. Not great as far as penetrating on his own, but in a motion-based offense, if the Pelicans can get some more of that, is good at playing off ball and has played and it just has a lot of experience with winning teams in order to bring that to your team. I think Monty Morris is somebody that the Pelicans have liked for a long time, somebody that fans have liked as well, a very dependable backup point guard, played for the Nuggets, played in Washington, played in Orlando. You've seen that he can take care of the basketball, he can knock down shots, and he can be an on-court leader for you. Another veteran, Spencer Dinwiddie, is going to be a free agent from the Dallas Mavericks. Spencer Dinwiddie, a guy who's been able to be a scoring lead guard in his time with the Nets and things like that, and also proved to be a capable backup again this year in backing up Kyrie Irving. So Spencer Dinwiddie, again, brings you a veteran presence. He brings you versatility at that position, can knock down shots, and has a good amount of physicality and size at the point guard position. I think that's very important for the Pelicans because there aren't a lot of speedy options who also can produce on the defensive end out there in the free agent market. Maybe somebody like a Markelle Fultz, who the Pelicans maybe auditioned a bit last season before they brought back Elfrid Payton. And Markelle, has shown flashes still, never lived up to that number 1 pick billing, but could be somebody as a reclamation project who at an inexpensive cost can come in and produce a bit more than what you got out of Elfrid Payton. And I know that there are folks who are going to just be on the side of Elfrid Payton because he's local and you're familiar with him and you've seen some good things as far as his passing. But I think you have to be a bit more athletic than Elfrid is, and I think you need better defense and, of course, better shooting. If you're going to have a starter at this point guard spot, they've got to be able to knock down shots. And quite frankly, Elfrid Payton is more than a reluctant shooter. He's an unwilling shooter. Lastly, you go for the storybook ending and you go after the return of Chris Paul. If you can convince Chris Paul that if this is going to be his last season and you can bring him in and you find a way to draft a young point guard or for a mentorship with a DeJounte Murray, I think that, and Murray really did not get mentored by Tony Parker in San Antonio. You've heard DeJounte Murray talk about Tony Parker's real reluctance to mentor DeJounte Murray. I think it's never too late to learn about the position. It's the most difficult position to play in the NBA, is to be a true point guard. And there are very few of those left. Chris Paul is one of the last men standing when it comes to running the point guard position as an orchestrator of the offense and not be a score first, pass second player at that position. So I think if you could get Chris Paul, who has made plenty of money in his career, who has done everything except win a championship, but that championship option just may not be available for him at this stage in his career, there could be some symmetry in bringing him back to New Orleans to close out his Hall of Fame career with the place that he started it, where he had a tremendous amount of success compared to what the Pelicans Hornets have done in their 23 years. It was a brief comet streaking across the sky, but I think there's an opportunity to kind of right the wrong of the way that ended for both sides. I think Chris regrets the way it ended in New Orleans, and I think the New Orleans fan base regrets how it ended. You'd like to see maybe that possibility. Quite honestly, I think it would be, if you see these things sometimes and they say which duos from the past would be perfect to play for your team right now. If you could have had a prime Chris Paul and a prime Tyson Chandler together on this Pelicans team, imagine that, because you would have solved the two biggest problems for this: rim protection from Tyson Chandler, the ability to rim run and finish, the Crescent City connection with him and Chris Paul, and the maturity of Chris to be able to run the team, set Zion up for alley-oops, to get him easier shots in transition, to find Trey Murphy the way he did for Peja Stojakovic. If you can even get a semblance of that, though, and Chris Paul played all 82 games last season for the San Antonio Spurs, so his durability is not a question. His ability to orchestrate is still not a question. He's going to value the basketball. Yes, you're going to play at a slower tempo with Chris in the half court, but what you do to counter that, if you did bring on Chris Paul, is that you allow Zion to push that ball off of misses. You allow that guy, those players to run in transition, with Chris being the one to orchestrate if the break isn't there. You give him the final few seconds of it, and if it's in the half court off of make and you're just bringing it up, then you let Chris run it and work and orchestrate to get guys easy shots in the half court. So I think that there are ways to mitigate his age, certainly, but he's shown that he's still durable at this stage in his career. It's no easy feat to play 82 games in this NBA, apparently. So I think it's a risk worth investigating. I don't know if it's feasible yet. I don't know if Chris is willing to take the pay cut that it will require for him to come and play for the Pelicans, but I think it's something certainly that both sides should explore, and I imagine that there's a mutual admiration between Joe Dumars and Chris Paul. Let's go to the front court, where I think you have some options as well. As you look at the front court, there are bigger names on the market, and I know that folks are focused on a guy like Naz Reid, for example, but that would require some other moves by the Pelicans. And certainly the way that I think one thing that may work in the favor of that is Julius Randle playing the way he has in this postseason for Minnesota. You've seen that Randle has a player option to opt in to his contract with the Timberwolves. And I think he may exercise that to ensure that he stays in a place where he's proven that he can be a solid contributor. If that's the case, Minnesota may be more reluctant in signing Naz Reid to a very big deal, putting him on the market. I think it would require other moves by the Pelicans to clear some space on the salary cap in order to bring him in. But so for this exercise, we're just going to look at the affordable options that fit in more closely with the team's current financial position. If you'd like, put your top tier free agent targets, regardless of position, your top tier targets that I'm not talking about here today, put those in the comments. And what I'll do is some deeper dives on what it would take to make those work. We'll put together some packages, maybe that could operate in some sign and trades, or what it would take to remove some players from the cap in order to facilitate a bigger deal. But if we're shopping with the current budget and we don't have any coupons, there are four names in particular that I think the Pelicans have to look at. Number one, I've said his name before, Kevon Looney from the Golden State Warriors, a guy who's 29 years old, has a decade of experience in the league. I think this was his 11th season. But his game will age well because it doesn't rely on athleticism. What he is a fantastic screen setter. He's a very solid defender. He can knock down the short mid-range shot, and he can finish around the rim, and he's going to defend the basket. Not a shot blocker, but a good paint protector because of his physicality and his quite frankly, his knowledge on the defensive end, a high basketball IQ. A guy who's going to give you more shot blocking and who's seen his value spike in this postseason is Luke Kornet. And what you're hoping there is that the Boston Celtics no longer have the financial flexibility. They're going to have to deal with this Jason Tatum injury. He's under contract. Jaylen Brown is under contract. And yes, there have been talks about potentially trading Jaylen Brown. But again, when you're talking about somebody whose final year of his contract balloons to the $50+ million, $60 million range, if you're the New Orleans Pelicans, you can't get involved in that. I don't think you can take on that player today without knowing the exact direction of your franchise. If you're going to put that's a win now move, and the Pelicans are not in a position to make win now moves. In a year, they could be, because we're seeing in a league that increasingly is showing more parity, 7 straight new champions. And this year will be the 7th in that. 7 straight new champions being crowned. Yes, you can get hot in 1 year and win by matchups. Seeding doesn't seem to matter right now. It just matters, do you have a really good player, and one elite player? And if you're a Pelicans fan, I think that has to encourage you, because you do already have one elite player in Zion Williamson. So if Zion Williamson peaks and is healthy, you have a guy who can win multiple playoff series for you just on his ability. What you have to do is build the right role players around him. And that does not always mean, as you look at teams like the Indiana Pacers, as you look at teams like the Minnesota Timberwolves, as you look at teams like the Oklahoma City Thunder, what you have is a lot of high-level role players along with one superstar. Now, maybe some of those Thunder players evolve into superstars, but right now, the only superstar on that roster is SGA. When you look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, the only superstar on that roster is Anthony Edwards. You have elite role players in Rudy Gobert and in Julius Randle, but neither of those would be considered a superstar as a franchise-changing player on their own. The New York Knicks, Jalen Brunson is the closest thing that they have to a superstar. He has proven over the last 3 seasons, leading the NBA in postseason scoring. So building your role players becomes increasingly important, and taking advantage of teams that are pricing themselves out of role players because they are so top-heavy financially is one way to do this. So a guy like a Luke Kornet, who can block shots and has continued to evolve over his career, you take him, he does not necessarily become your starting center, but if you draft a talented center like Kaman Malawak in the draft, or if you don't and you allow Yves Missi to continue to start, then having a guy like Luke Kornet, who has played in a motion-based offense, who knows what he is supposed to do defensively, has proven to you that he can protect the rim against very talented offensive teams, then I think that that's an investment worth making. Another guy, Thomas Bryant, who's currently playing with the Indiana Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals. Thomas Bryant has been one of those players that has expanded his offensive game as he's gotten into the league, is able to knock down the three-point shot, but also gives you an amount of physicality in the paint. He's also able to defend around the rim. Not a great shot blocker, but I think he addresses a lot of your low post concerns offensively, and again, gives you a perimeter-oriented big who can both play inside and out. A guy who's going to be more perimeter oriented, but also gives you length and size at that position is Santi Aldama of the Memphis Grizzlies. Somebody who's been a target of a lot of Pelicans observers, somebody that has been a fan favorite, somebody who's been a favorite of the analytics community as well. Seems like an ascending player who the Grizzlies cannot afford to keep on their roster. So I think those options, when you talk about the backcourt, DeLon Wright, Monty Morris, Spencer Dinwiddie, Chris Paul, and then going into the front court, Kevon Looney, Luke Kornet, Thomas Bryant, and Santi Aldama. Those are all names I think that the Pelicans could really get involved with in trying to make the fringes of this roster better. Because if you don't have a great bench, if you don't have a deep bench, I mean, you look at these teams right now, they're able to go 8-9 into their benches as you get deeper in the playoffs. And if the Pelicans, I don't think anyone would have felt comfortable last season seeing their 8th, 9th man on the floor on most nights. So take care of those little pieces. Take care of those fringe parts of your roster. Strengthen your bench. And I think, again, and I've said this on other of our podcasts, you kind of do have to coach proof your team. And people say, well, why should you do that? It doesn't. If your coach is good, you don't have to. When you see teams that have done this and have gone through multiple coaches, when you look at the Boston Celtics, who started their run with Ime Udoka as the coach, even before that with why am I forgetting Brad's name? But the coach there, Brad Stevens, started with Brad Stevens, moves to the front office. You go to Ime Udoka, and now you're on Joe Mazzulla. Third coach, same system essentially, same core players essentially. You've coached proof your team in that regard. You look at a team like the Bucks that had a lot of transitions outside of the player transitions of switching over to a Dame Lillard team over the years, whether it was Budenholzer or whether it was prior to that, as they were building that team, it was generally the same philosophy built around one player, but with a bench that matched what that primary player Giannis Antetokounmpo needed. You saw the same thing. Look at the Denver Nuggets, who changed coaches, and everyone said, well, what are you doing without Mike Malone? Well, they still got to Game 7 of the Eastern Conference semifinals with a chance to advance with a new coach. We've just seen that this changeover maybe doesn't necessarily impact teams as much as you think in the short run. It might hit you in the playoffs. It might hit you with certain decisions like that. But if you can find a way to coach-proof your team by making sure you have enough talent, 1 through 8, 1 through 9, then I think that's a great move to make for your front office. All right, that's going to do it for today's show. We'll be back again on Thursday. But before we wrap up, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you hit that subscribe. Hit that notification bell as well. And if you'd like to follow me on social media, you can hit @DMGrubb on X, on Instagram. You can find me also on TikTok and Blue Sky, whichever your favorite format or platform is. So until the next time, y'all be good. And let's go Pels.